So that's pretty much it for the lab this week. But there are a couple of topics that I didn't quite cover in the walkthrough, and so I'm going to go through those. So I covered pretty much everything up to objects and references. This is an easy one, but something you should be aware of. So let's go back to the test me. And here I'm creating a name popularity set. Let's just go ahead and make a name set instead. And I'll use the name Mark, male, and no second argument. And then down here, let's go ahead and get rid of all of this stuff. And create a PHP island and print our records. So I'm going to go ahead and reload this page. Let's test me. Oh, and I have to include NameSet. So NameSet does take a third parameter, the metaphone. Which is MRK. Great. So here are the records. Now, let's say I was going to change the rank here. And I'm going to go ahead and add a loop. So for each records as record pointer set rank $i, and up here we'll set $i to 0, and each time through the loop we'll increment the value of I. So if I was using associative arrays here, then record would actually be a copy of the record in this array. And any change that I made to that associative array would have no effect on the array inside of records. But objects are different. All object references are treated as references. So this is not just a record, it's actually a reference to the record in this array. And it's exactly the same as if I had done that. Oh, yeah, this should actually be records pointer get records as record. So let's go ahead and, the original version, you'll see the mrank is 0 for all of these records. But if I reload, now mrank has gone up, and the dirty bit is also set. So any change I make to this record affects the record object in the record set, even though this isn't explicitly marked as a reference. So static, we saw an example of static constants. So for example, in metaphone set, I define some static constants, and these are attached to the class metaphone set. So if I want to refer to one of these, I say metaphone set : name field, like so, and that refers to the value of this constant for the class. You can also define methods that are associated with a class rather than an object. So for example, I'm going to define a static function called what am I, and it's not going to take any parameters, and it's going to echo I am a metaphone set. So now I have a function that's attached to the class rather than a method on an object of the class. So watch what happens in test me now. I'm going to go ahead and create a new metaphone set. And we'll use MRK and male. And let's go 50 rows. And then after doing the printar of records, I'm going to call metaphone set : what am I? Oh, and I have to include that as well. So my ranks are all set for the metaphone class now, even though I hadn't specified any ranks. And at the end it says I am a metaphone set. So the advantage of a static property or static method is that I can call this method without actually having a metaphone object. So this is a good place to put, for example, if you have a factory that builds metaphone objects, or if you want to have some support utility functions that are associated with a class, but not associated with any particular object, you can make them static. There's only one copy of this. So you can also have static variables, like so. So I'm going to create a static variable named count equals 0. And then inside of my test me, instead of using this variable I, I'm going to use metaphone set : $count. And here I'm going to increment metaphone set : $count. And then I'm going to change what am I to say I am a metaphone set with dot metaphone set : count objects. So let's go ahead and reload. I am a metaphone set with 50 objects. And if you look at the top, you'll see that there's nothing on this metaphone set, no property on this metaphone set for count, because it's a static property. It's on the class, not on the object. So we saw the scope resolution operator : and it's used both to refer to static properties and to refer to static methods, and also to refer to static constants. So here's a static property or static variable. Here's a static method. And here's a static constant. And they all use the same scope resolution operator. So, quick word on equality. Let me go ahead and create two objects. Mark 1 is new name popularity record. Mark male 1962 1 1000 90,000 MRK. And then I'm going to create another object called Mark 2, which is exactly the same. So Mark 1 and Mark 2 are separate objects, but they have the same type. They're both name records, name popularity records. They have the same attributes and the same attribute values. So let's echo Mark 1 equal Mark 2 colon dot Mark 1 equal Mark 2, and let's say question mark true else false dot, parentheses around that as well, break, and then I'm going to copy this and use equal. So this first thing should be true because these objects are the same class and they have the same properties with the same values, whereas this is going to be false because they're not exactly the same object. So for equal to be true, this has to be exactly the same object as this. So this should be false. That should be true. And then this should also be true because Mark 3 is a reference to the same object that Mark 1 is. So let's go ahead and try it. So Mark 1 equal Mark 2 is true. Mark 1 equal Mark 2 is false. Mark 1 equal to itself is true because it's exactly the same object. And Mark 1 equal a reference to Mark 1 is also true because it's exactly the same object. So that's pretty much it. The only other point is object serialization. So all of the objects we've been writing can be serialized, which means you can store them on the session object, and they will be recreated when you restore the session. So when you start the session again, any objects you've stored on the session will get recreated, assuming that you've required the class before you start the session. So that will work fine as long as you require this before you start session. Now, in some cases, for example, if I have an object that's holding a database connection and I store that on the session, that database connection is going to go away when the page is finished loading. And then when I restart the session, it will recreate the object, but that database connection won't be valid anymore. So in that case, you can actually run a piece of code when the object is being unserialized to restore that connection. But that's a more advanced topic. All you need to know this week is that you can store an object in a session, and as long as you load the class before you start the session, it will be restored correctly. And that's it for this week. I want you to take a look at PSR1. I've been following it through all of these demos. Basically, class names are in upper camel case. Class constants, just like regular constants, are all going to be all uppercase with underscores between each word. And then I've also been using a convention where both property names and method names are written in lower camel case. So PSR1 specifies camel case for method names, but doesn't say anything about property names. But I'm using camel case for those as well. And finally, as you noticed, I'm using M for all private properties, and I suggest you do the same. And that's it for this week, and also for this class. So I hope you've learned something interesting this term, and that I see you again in a future course.